Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the lecture on anisotropic nature of bone. Concepts covered in this lecture are trabecular orientation, bone anisotropy, consideration in numerical modeling of bone, and finally the orthotropic bone adaptation. Let us first discuss trabecular orientation. The drawings of Julius Wolff compared the alignment of the trabecular structure with the principal stress directions of Kalman's analysis of a Fairbairn crane. In this figure, a simplified solid model of a Fairbairn crane was considered, assuming continuum. The figure shows that the principal stress directions, owing to the vertically applied load at D, can roughly be compared with those of the proximal femur. The trabecular orientation or architecture in the proximal femur appeared to be somewhat similar to the principal stress directions in the simplified Fairbairn crane structure. It has been earlier identified that both the shape of the femoral shaft and the alignment of the internal trabeculae resists the stresses that arise from human body weight during physiological activity. Julius Koch later studied the stress trajectories and distributions in the proximal femur. His study mathematically confirmed that the trabecular arrangement is more or less in an orthogonal manner. Later studies identified that the trabeculae may intersect at acute angles in the regions of complex loading in order to resist shear. The trabeculae in the proximal femur can be classified into 5 main groups according to their functions, as shown in the figure. In this figure, the 5 main trabecular groups in the proximal femur has been plotted. As indicated, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 are the primary compression group, primary tension lines, secondary compression group, secondary tension line, and the number 5 is the greater trochanter line. So, these are the trabecular groups that mostly intersect in an orthogonal manner, but there are cases, regions where it intersects at an acute angle as well. Now, in this slide, the drawings of the alignment of trabeculae for different lower limbs have been presented. So, the trabecular orientation in foot, in distal tibia, distal fibula, proximal tibia, distal femur, proximal femur and pelvis has been plotted. Now, let us discuss about bone morphology and anisotropy. Loading influences bone morphology and hence the trabecular orientation. The image shows the morphology of bone samples. There are about 7 samples from different areas of the proximal femur. Sample 1 and 2 have similar bone morphology, as you can see, and these have higher bone density as well. So, these 1 and 2 samples are from the principal compression group area PC, whereas the sample 3 and 4 have similar bone morphology with a lesser amount of bone density, and they correspond to the principal tension group. The samples 5 and 6 in comparison have similar bone morphology with even lesser bone density. These samples correspond to the secondary tension and compression groups in the proximal femur. In between the compressive and the tensile groups, there is a triangular shaped region which is sparsely dense, that is number 7. This area is known as the Ward's triangle. So, let us summarize the anisotropic properties of bone. Bone is broadly classified as an anisotropic material. Anisotropic nature of bone in proximal femur arises from the trabecular orientations of the tensile and compressive groups. Studies of Julius Wolff suggested that the trabecular orientation may coincide with the direction of principal stresses. Orthotropic assumption was reported to be the closest approximation to bone anisotropy based on the experimental measurement of bone mechanical properties. Stress-strain induced changes in bone microstructure lead to changes in bone apparent density and trabecular reorientation. Now, the property of bone tissue was mostly assumed to be isotropic in many finite element studies, representing basically a simplified material model. But the main question was, how can we include anisotropy of bone in the numerical models? Now, bone anisotropy in numerical models can be implemented using several techniques, which are presented in the following: micro-FE model, the fabric tensor method, the strain-based algorithm, and the principle of continuum damage mechanics. Let us consider the analysis of micro-FE models of the femur. The trabecular architecture can be quantified using image processing of a large number of high resolution micro CT images to create a micro-FE model. The reconstructed micro CT image of bone segments are presented here in the figure, and a micro-FE model of the proximal femur is also presented on the left hand side. This study was done by Varulp in 2006, published in Journal of Biomechanics. The micro-FE model analysis is a numerical technique to calculate mechanical properties of trabecular bones, since they are related to the microstructure. However, these micro-FE simulations are computationally very expensive because they consist of a large number of elements. The omission of bone tissue anisotropy has been found to have little effect on the calculated stresses and strain distribution. Let us consider more in detail about the study by Varulp et al. 2006. So, he considered two types of micro-FE models, one from the healthy bone, the other from the osteoporotic bone. So, he had a 0.08 millimeter voxel micro-FE model, and he had the other more coarser model, which were macroscopic model assuming continuum, and one was 0.64 millimeter voxel, the other was around 3 millimeter voxel size. So, they were comparing the macro scale continuum model with the micro FE model constructed from micro CT scans. The study observed that the micro FE model predicted slightly better strain distribution than the continuum model. The difference was around 5% as compared to the voxel continuum based model. However, the micro FE model predicts better results as the bone actually becomes more osteoporotic, indicating the profound influence of bone anisotropy in the osteoporotic bone model. The maximal principal strain distribution in the micro FE models and continuum based models were based on tissue density. Let us come to another method, the fabric tensor method. The fabric tensor can be used to describe the orientation and anisotropy of trabecular bone. Fabric tensor is calculated based on the representative volume elements of the bone at a particular location. The approaches can be either mechanics based or morphology based. The former approach computes, the mechanics based approach computes the fabric tensor from mechanical simulations, while the latter computes it by analyzing the morphology of trabecular bone from images, high resolution images. The fabric tensor is a systematic second rank tensor which characterizes the geometric arrangement of the porous material microstructure. Let us consider the stiffness tensor, which can directly be used as a fabric tensor. You can see the expression. In this expression, the sigma and epsilon are the stress and strain tensor respectively. Both sigma and epsilon are second order tensors, and C is the stiffness tensor of fourth order of a material. So, this equation corresponds to the generalized Hooke's law. By using the Foyt notation, C can be actually represented by the following 6 by 6 symmetric matrix. C can be represented by 6 by 6 symmetric matrix. The entries of the stiffness matrix computed at a local scale can be estimated by running several finite element model method based simulations of the same FE model. At least 6 of such simulations, each of them with different boundary conditions, are required to calculate the entries of the stiffness matrix. So, we can conclude the number of independent elastic constants for a general anisotropic material. There are 81 independent elastic constants. For linear elastic anisotropic material, 21 independent elastic constants. Monoclinic material, 13 independent elastic constants. Orthotropic material, 9 independent elastic constants. Transversely isotropic material, 5 independent elastic constants. And finally, the orthotropic material needs 2 independent elastic constants. Now, let us move into the fabric tensors based on the morphology approach. The morphology approach is less computationally expensive than those obtained from the mechanical simulations. Let us consider the fabric tensors, which is categorized under the morphology based approaches. Fabric tensors are less computationally expensive than those obtained from mechanical simulations. A vast majority of morphology based methods have been proposed, as shown in the following table, out of which the boundary based methods, considering the mean intercept length tensor or the global gradient structure tensor, has been found to be popular. Let us consider the mean intercept length tensor. Mean intercept length tensor is very effective in predicting mechanical properties of trabecular bone. As discussed earlier, bone is a composite material consisting of different phases. The mean intercept length with respect to a particular orientation is defined as the mean distance from one phase to the other, as presented in the figure. The global gradient structure tensor is another method. It is volume based method that compute anisotropy from measures taken with a single phase. The local volume orientation at a point is given by the orientation corresponding to the largest intercept at that point, as shown in the figure. Let us now consider the orthotropic bone adaptation. The orientation of the trabeculae generally coincides well with the direction of the highest stresses and strain found in isotropic continuum models. Strain based orthotropic remodeling can be implemented using this approach. The trabecular architecture may be determined using the principal stress directions. The elastic constants are updated based on strain in the principal stress directions. At each iteration, the stress and strain tensors are extracted for each element. Please note, it is element wise extraction. So, for an element, the stress and strain tensors are extracted. The eigen analysis of the stress tensors gives the local principal stress vectors, the directions sigma PV, and the corresponding principal stress values sigma P. Let us now discuss some studies which has been carried out on strain based bone adaptation. In the slide, we can see that the dominant bone material orientation in the proximal femur has been plotted. The first figure A predicted compressive and tensile regions. Compressive has the color red and the tensile blue. The second figure is the micro CT reconstruction of the same regions of the same model. And the third one is predicted principal stress direction that has been carried out in our laboratory. So, the dominant directional Young's moduli are highlighted in red and blue. In this simulation, the mechanical stimulus is considered as strain along principal directions. The strains are transformed along principal stress directions. The starting configuration, however, is isotropic heterogeneous model on which bone remodeling rule has been applied, finally yielding trabecular orientation as a result. However, as an intermediate result can be obtained in the form of upgradation of the elastic modulus. Please note that orthotropic bone remodeling will be discussed elaborately later in module 7 in lecture number 7.4, wherein details about theory, formulation and algorithm development will be presented. This is another alternate orthotropic adaptation model, very recently investigated by Andrew Phillips and his group. They introduced a mesoscale femur model consisting of idealized elements such as trusses, beams, shells to represent the structural components of the bone, as shown in the figure clearly here in different views. This FE model was found to reproduce the structural architecture of bone when subject to complex loading conditions. Moreover, this approach provided results of higher spatial resolution as compared to microscale continuum model, but with a less computational requirement. Let us come to the conclusion of this lecture. The trabecular orientation of bone is along the direction of principal stresses. Proximal femur possesses tensile and compressive groups in order to maintain its structural strength. Bone anisotropy can be implemented in the numerical simulation using various methods. Explicit modeling of trabecular bone can be achieved using micro-FE models. However, these models are computationally very expensive. Orthotropic bone remodeling simulation involves calculation of principal stress directions. The references, quite a few, are listed here in 3 slides, and I thank you all for listening.